Well, if we want to talk about how much I enjoyed that time in my life, listen to this silence for 4 seconds. The biggest opportunity in my whole career, maybe the biggest opportunity since then, with in regards to kind of like even sniffing that upper mid card or main event spot, either with myself or obviously the entire group. But there was a lot of struggles and a lot of things I was exposed to as far as backstage stuff that was the more negative side of professional wrestling, especially WWE. So, but it was definitely a great learning experience that set in a lot of maybe hyper accountability type of traits in me now. Like I went the exact opposite way that I was then. And we're going to talk about that. One of the things, the major weight gain and the reasons behind it, no excuses, but reasons and things that I let get to me personally and professionally. So where do you want to start? Do you want to start with basically the background of, because people might think, well, RTC, right to censor, it just kind of came out of nowhere, but there was a legitimate motivation of Vince McMahon and a legitimate reason for him to do this. Because, right, much like a lot of things, the change, and I'll let you elaborate and tell the story from, a news perspective. It was just, once again, Vince McMahon in kind of the fight for WWE survival. Maybe not as much as what we had with the WCW versus WWE Monday Night Wars, but there was a group that was really trying to starve out WWE in an advertising, income sense.
So there were a couple of things before, and you're referring to the Parents Television Council, of course, before this, they really get involved. And the first one is sort of like an inkling of like censorship that I believe is a Vince Russo idea. Gold Dust, Dustin Runnels burnt his, I don't know if you remember, like April, May, somewhere around that time, he used to have a sleeveless Gold Dust outfit. This was after months of dressing up in the most crazy Marilyn Manson kind of outfits and that kind of thing, and gimp ball gag and green leather kind of thing. Anyway, he burns the Gold Dust outfits and then declares the gimmick dead, and then for a few weeks he becomes actually one of the biggest baby faces on television, just as Dustin Runnels. And then on a dime he switches to become a pious, sort of holier-than-thou Christian character, worried about the morality that is being corrupted on WWF television at the time. Then the Goldust character would return in the autumn of 1998, so it was pretty short-lived. It didn't really do Dustin any good. Then in late 1999, and this is something I only found out today, on a few select episodes of WWF television, I knew this bit about the punchline, a large bald man would walk around WWF arenas holding up signs like WWF is immoral. And I remember this specifically because it was in the WWF magazine of 2000, February. I actually had a picture of the guy with WWF as moral as a sign. Anyway, he did this for a few episodes in November 1999, around that time, and then disappeared again. Turns out that the bald guy was David Koechner, a.k.a. Champ Kind from Anchorman. How did I never know that David Koechner was part of this? I mean, did you ever meet him?
No, I never met him. This is the guy who plays the really lewd salesperson in The Office as well, right? The U.S. version. So, no, I never met him. And you're talking about the timeline, late 99, early 2000. I was kind of not really booked all that much. I might have come in and did like the secondary shows, Jack, Metal, once in a while on Raw or SmackDown doing the parody gimmick, impersonating Edge and Christian, impersonating Dude Love, all this stuff. Leading up June 2000 is when I cut my hair and became Stevie Richards before the Right to Censor. I believe they cut my hair in Worcester, Massachusetts in June. And then from that point on, it was a parody of the Parent Television Council. But I don't remember this at all, man. You have a really good memory, or it just stuck out because you must be an Anchorman fan, right? So it's definitely, it's funny, like hiring a guy like that at that point. Was he even on The Office then, or was he just a kind of a pay-by-hire extra actor?
Didn't exist at this point. I mean, I don't even know if David Koechner was like particularly famous at this time, but he just wandered around the arenas And specifically, I remember that magazine, and I always thought it was a genuine guy from the Parents Television Council or something similar. I actually thought, it was like genuine picketing. But this, I believe, is essentially around the same time that the Parents Television Council got involved with WWF affairs and the television programs. So why would Vince McMahon allow this on his shows, this character? So as a little bit of background, since 1999, Vince McMahon and the WWF was getting targeted by the Parents Television Council, a conservative Christian values advocacy group founded and led by L. Brent Bozell III. And here's a fun fact. The honorary chairman of the PTC at the time was former wrestling commentator and WrestleMania special guest Steve Allen. Now, people are thinking, well, he's obviously more famous for chat shows and being a comedian. He was actually, in I think the late 50s maybe, a wrestling commentator back in the day. There's actually video on YouTube of him talking about it as well. So, the PTC, they had issues with the WWF programming, along with various shows like all Seth MacFarlane's animated shows and South Park and Friends, and Two and a Half Men and Ally McBeal and Dawson's Creek and Grey's Anatomy and the OC, and that 70s show, which I personally had a problem with because it wasn't funny. They pressured the FCC to levy fines and hoped to have advertisers boycott shows the PTC deemed irresponsible, overtly offensive, sexually explicit, or blasphemous. In the WWF's case, it actually partially worked. So when WWF SmackDown became a regular show on broadcast network UPN, the PTC took an added interest. When it was on cable only, they weren't too bothered. And then they basically sprung into action like from August 1999 onwards when SmackDown became a regular show. The PTC claimed they had cost the WWF 30 to 40 advertisers thanks to their campaigning, which is a claim that is not true. The WWF in turn quickly started to scale back on some of the swearing and some of the raunchy aspects of the television presentation within months of SmackDown's inception. We'll talk about Right to Censor in a minute, but in late 1999 to early 2000, I know that, as you said, you were on Jacked, you were on Heat, exclusively in 2000 up to June. Did you notice, or were there any edicts passed by Vince or any of the office people to not do certain things, not swear as much, not gesticulate in certain manners, that kind of thing?
No, because I wasn't in that orbit of getting promos and getting things to say or getting angles that needed to be produced. My whole thing was just matches, finish. That was about it. And not even with the agents micromanagement. This is before they even wrote stuff down. They walked through. They had the IFPs on the referee to communicate moves to the wrestlers. I mean, they have IFPs for, hey, you need to go home now, or we need an extra 2 minutes. But I wasn't privy to any of this stuff. This is probably mostly production meeting stuff or inner circle meetings. And then obviously the top guys or anybody with promos are going to get, they probably were kind of shocked that they were given these like barriers, boundaries, guardrails they need to stay within. But there's a few different reasons, and we'll get to it, why the right to censor was formed, besides a defensive mechanism or even just a big middle finger F you to the Parent Television Council. But there was a good motivation to have the right to censor there. And we can get to that after we talk about the formation of what they told me it was on the first piece of commentary I ever did. I think it was on SmackDown. They kept telling me to call it the right to censorship. And I was like, that something in my mind, even though I wasn't really knowing why, it's just too many syllables. It doesn't roll off the tongue. And I was like, and I remember mentioning it to, might have been Michael Call. I said, hey man, do you think they want to like shorten that or just call it the RTC? And he was like, Vince just said, just say it. But when they aired it, they kept like silencing after I said right to censor. Ship was completely muted out, almost to the point where it's a little jarring because the crowd noise is different or it's not there. Go back and watch it because it is on YouTube.
So just before we get to, the inception of the group, did you notice any picketing by PTC members? Were you reading any in the newspapers that they were targeting the WWF? Did you have any knowledge at all that the PTC were going after Vince?
They probably did bring it up in talent meetings at one point towards the end when they started to clue everybody in that was getting a lot of promo time, and then they figured we might as well have a talent meeting. I believe there was one talent meeting and saying we need to kind of go in a different direction. This might have been for all I know, May of 2000, and then June is when they did it, or it could have been that day. I know that there was something not too long before they cut my hair and they brought me out as Stevie Richards, before it was even the right to censor at all. There was at least one thing, but I think a lot of it was delegating down to the writers, the agents, and everybody, to where when the finished or the finished creative product gets in the hands of the talent, they're like, oh, no cursing, no this, or even a list. I mean, I think there started to be a list sometimes on the board and on the papers by the production office where it was like, no swearing, no this now. Although, if you're not swearing, Austin swearing or other people within their gimmick, it must have been tough for Steve or Rocky. I don't think they would have budged too much, but imagine if Steve Austin wasn't allowed to give the middle fingers or say the word ass. And then Rocky was in full like pie mode and all this stuff in his promos. Imagine if those got watered down. Those guys it might have hurt their career at the time a little bit.
This is something I want to bring up to you, and you and Blue Meanie, your careers are, I'm going to try and say this word, intrinsically, somewhere like that, linked together. But the thing is, Blue Meanie is let go after a year, and I've spoken to Meanie about this, and it's a fine theory, and I think it's probably true, is that he was a Vince Russo hire like you, essentially. So they never they did the Blue Dust thing, but he'd already done that in ECW. Blue Meanie and you basically took your ECW characters and brought it to the WWF, and Vince McMahon or The Machine hadn't created you or hadn't molded you into their image. And I sort of figured that if they hadn't come up with Right to Censor for you to really change your character into a WWF creation, you could have ended up like Meanie. Essentially, you would have just been seen as another ECW guy coming over, and then you had your run and then you go again. So, this really, in my opinion, I don't know about yours, extended your career greatly with the WWF, this change of direction.
Yeah, I believe it did. I don't really fight that theory too much. As a matter of fact, the whole thing in the beginning, I believe, was just a rib on Parent Television Council, of course. I don't think it was made for, even though we could have gotten more time out of it, and we'll talk about that probably in the second part of the series with the downfall, but I really believe that this was only going to be a 3 to 4 week thing, a rib on that, just a passing gimmick, and maybe even a rib on me to see if I would cut my hair and just let me go after that. It could have been like a final insult on the way out. I think the advantage I had, and I'm not speaking out of turn with this, it's just a realistic thing. They could have also released Meanie because he was overweight. His work wasn't, much like I'll talk about when I gained all the weight, my work suffered when I was with Right to Censor and gained all the way up to 262 and had to carry potentially 62 pounds more than I was used to. Meanie's work never evolved. He never recreated himself. He never did anything to give them a different look to say, oh, Blue Meanie, we can change him and repackage him into this. Now, Meanie did lose a ton of weight after that in 3PW, I believe, and he was the Blue Boy, and he was super, lean and thin. But the funny part, weird part about wrestling and wrestling fans is, that's not the Blue Meanie people love. The Blue Meanie people loved is the guy that was severely overweight, yet could move and moonsault and do stuff like that. And for me, I think WWE released him way too early too, because just seeing a big guy like that go up and deliver the moonsault is a feature. To see Meanie do anything remarkably athletic or agile for a guy his size, just one spot, you could have drew money with that. And of course, Meanie is incredibly entertaining, and we talked about it before, you can't have anybody, or everybody, I should say, always mad, always pissed off, always wanting to fight. You need to have some kind of fun and comic relief on the show. So they didn't get the most out of the investment, Meanie. And then later on, obviously we're talking about it well after the fact, where these two guys are good friends. Do you think the whole thing with him and Bradshaw, kind of like this, at each other, maybe unspoken, or maybe tension, or maybe Bradshaw messed with him and didn't respect him? I don't know. That's pure speculation, but maybe it all adds up to Meanie getting released, where I didn't have any of that. I was just working matches, proving I wasn't in the best shape I could be, but I could bump, I could move, I could work babyface and heel in these enhancement matches on the secondary shows. I could come up and have a little bit of range with the parody, which, by the way, if Mimi was with me and we were the new Brood or the Brood WO or whatever, parody, it would have only made the gimmick even better. So by doing that, they only got half of the impact that I was doing with the imitation gimmick. So you can always, no matter what anybody, like if you have, I know I'm talking ad nauseum, but Mania deserves for people to still appreciate him for the talent that he was and still is, because he can go out there, entertain, and do his thing. I think it was in the MLW Battle Riot a couple of years ago and got like the biggest pop in the Battle Royal at the ECW Arena with a BWO music hit. They were excited to see Meanie. There's still intrinsic value, I'll use your word, intrinsic value in a talent right up to the point where they literally can't get to the ring. And Meanie's one of those guys.
I think, yeah, when I interviewed Meanie, I got the impression that he just sort of thought that The Office saw him as a Vince Russo holdover. And then because, they never reinvented him, maybe it's just one of those things where they just decided creative has nothing for you, and then he ends up going back to ECW in that sense. Would you have continued doing the impersonations of other wrestlers at the time if it was up to you? Did you see like more value in that? We'll talk about that more in a future episode, I'm sure, but did you want to do something different?
No, I don't think so. Even in retrospect, 2020 is hindsight and all that stuff. You can say it very easily, but even at the time, I was aware enough to know, first of all, I was a Vince Russo hire and Vince Russo was gone. So I was smart enough politically to know that my biggest advocate for getting me here is gone like a week after I got there. And that might have been why I kind of languished in those secondary shows for a while, because Russo probably would have written me into that. Once again, Meanie and I trying to kill a dog at SummerSlam with jumper cables. That might not have been the path I wanted to go in my career, but is what I had. I believe, just like the Dr. Stevie gimmick, and we're going to get to the Dr. Stevie era in a special, probably 2-part series there, but I knew something needed to change. And as far as my ego with cutting my hair, of course I didn't want to cut my hair. It was too comfortable, kind of like I am now, but the opportunity to do something, and I knew I was getting tested. I just didn't know if it was going to be a 3 or 4 week run or if I was going to make the most out of it. And thank God I had a writer that was absolutely completely in my corner to where we could write the promos to shift, and we'll get to it, shift from a parody, a continuation of an imitation parody gimmick of the Parent Television Council to a full-blown cult following within the group.
So do you see the well, we're going to go further back in like the making of Right to Censor, but do you see the Right to Censor in the first time you came out there with the shirt and the Mormon outfit pretty much? Did you see that as a continuation of the parody character you were doing?
No, I just saw it as might be short-lived. I never done a parody character as a truly hated heel. It was always just kind of, with Raven, I was a lovable heel, being the clueless putz. People were kind of entertained by it. This was the first time where the music, the presentation, everything that people could like or think was cool or could attach to and appreciate was removed. And it needed to be. Now people in 2024 are like, you guys won with the PG era, and, they can appreciate how much they hated me at the time. But no, at that time, there was people, it was legitimate, kind of felt like old school Memphis heat. Because you're taking, in their mind, and we're going to talk about the backstage reasons why I kind of educatedly guess why they needed to change everything, using the Right to Censor as that vehicle, as the instigator to change the style of the TV product. But this was legitimately people saying, we paid a ticket, we bought a pay-per-view, and you're trying to ruin our good time and not give us our money's worth. They effing hated me.
With the Right to Censor group, tell us about the meet. I imagine you're sat down, someone, I don't know if it's Vince or Bruce Pritchard or somebody else, explains to you what they want to do with you. And obviously this is going to go into the haircutting story as well, because you've alluded to it about 3 times already. I know you want to tell the whole story with it. So talk about the first time you heard about the concept of a Right to Censor group. It may not have even been a group, it might have just been you. But tell us about the first time you heard of Right to Censor, who told you about it, and what concepts had already been fleshed out when it was presented to you.
It was brought up to me as a cold pitch. Basically, you're going to do it. It was brought up as a cold pitch from Vince McMahon himself. I got called into Vince's office, which right there, you're a new guy, you're nervous, you're trying to impress everybody. You don't want to get heat with anybody. You don't want the boss to kind of know you're there until you get more comfortable with the way things work, which, by the way, after 10 years in the company, I still wasn't comfortable and knew the way things worked. So that was a exercise in futility. But he called me in his office and he said, have a seat. And I'm just like, oh my God. And we're alone in the office. And he's talking and he goes, I'm paraphrasing. And, Janelle Graham was there, by the way. She wasn't even born, I don't think. So he said, we have this idea. And basically he gave me kind of like the Cliff Notes version of the Parent Television Council and what you're going to be. Encouraged me to join the Parent Television Council, which I did, to get all the literature, marketing materials, all that stuff. And he didn't give a big pitch like you're going to be the biggest heel in the company or we're going to have a group. And there was nothing like that. And he did say, we need you to cut your hair. He said something to the effect, do you mind doing that? Or would you mind doing that? Or can you, is there a problem? He was trying to I was like, no, absolutely not. I said, how short do you want me to cut it? Because I was trying to get away with like maybe some hair or whatever. He goes, no, you're going to basically almost full buzz cut, or you're going into a haircut like somebody who joined the PTC. And I remember getting my hair cut, and he actually came by and made sure the hair was cut short enough and everything. Made 2-3 minute thing, like not a big deal. And that was it. I took notes. I was always told, try to take notes when Vince was talking and show you're paying attention or whatever. So I took a couple notes, but I could instantly, the wrestlers are naturally paranoid. I didn't know if you knew that, James. So my paranoia was, is this a rib? Are they just doing it? Are they going to get rid of me? They released Meanie. So it was kind of in the back of my head. Are they looking to get rid of ECW guys? Are they looking to do this or that? So when that happened, I really thought it was the beginning of the end. And then he told me what they wanted me to wear, which I think was presented more like a Jehovah's Witness type outfit, which that's what they wear. Black pants. I think I even saw one time, like initially the outfit, we can get in the outfit in itself, but Jim Ross used to call me Old White Socks. And people had wondered, like, oh, that was so genius. You wore the white socks and it just stood out. And it was so, by the way, I went to Catholic school and we always wore, for some reason, white socks. I never liked wearing the thin black ones. But in this case, they wanted me to wrestle in those shoes. I was wrestling in like legitimate shoes for a little bit. And the dress socks would just cut my heel up as I was running. So I would wear the white socks instead. And then it just caught on. They thought I had Vince, like every time he could throw, let me steal those socks. And I'd pull up and he'd laugh. He thought it was great. By the way, when you think you're over with Vince, don't get too arrogant, don't get too cocky, and don't take it for granted. Because the dude will wake up the next day and think those white socks are the stupidest thing ever.
Did you get like a creative services thing? I don't even know if creative services was too much of a thing in 2000, but in the 90s and 80s, you'd get presented with like, a big white piece of card with, an artist rendering. Did you get anything like that as part of a presentation?
I wasn't in that famous department that has the materials for the no, we went to whatever Kmart or something and I got it. And somehow, like to this day, when I want to do like for this episode, I was looking for the outfit to wear it for the episode. I might try it for part 2. But you cannot find short sleeve white dress shirts anymore. I have to cut them and then sew them. But back then I was like, well, the short sleeve ones are like $5 or $6 cheaper than the long sleeve. And it's going to be easier for me to move around. And I know you got questions about wrestling in the outfit. not fun. But yeah, it was literally just like the Daisy Dukes in a half shirt. Okay, let me go buy a pair of jeans, throw it through the dryer 4 times, and let's go to the buy or die box at Hot Topic and look for the out of date bands. It's a the perfect frugal wrestler's gimmick method.
I'm trying to think. So you've already said it was just miserable experience, wrestling and the stuff. We'll talk about the weight and stuff in a minute, but you said something interesting before you actually joined the Parents Television Council. What did you learn from their lingo that you actually incorporated in your promos?
Well, I'm trying to think exactly what it was. There was formulations of certain phrases like, fight the good fight, I think was like pretty close to what they were doing. It's for your own good is a very condescending thing that Jacob Israel, the writer, that's the writer who I worked with that was there. We were responsible for pretty much all the promos. I defer to Jacob because, I wouldn't have an idea. He would give it to me and then I could kind of dress it up in my own personality. But fight the good fight. It's for your own good. I think scantily clad women was in the PTC website. Sexuality, those kinds of one-word terms, I think were in their pitch letter to try to get advertisers to not give money to WWE. I'm trying to think of what else it could be. It was just expanded from that. Like basically when you plead with the fans, like I'm just trying to help you and you people are not listening to me and the look into my eyes thing was me because there was I forget what it was because I studied a lot of serial killers, which I had to do again for Dr. Stevie. That was basically American Psycho. But I did look at Manson, Jim Jones, a bunch of other people, and I could swear either it was that or one of those phony preachers that said, "Look into my eyes." And I said, "That's perfect." Because anytime I was beating somebody up or when I was joking, saying China in the corner, looking in my eyes, I'm trying to help you. I'm doing it for your own good. Those were the money spots in the ring that I could get real heat without doing a ton of moves.
With the promos, again, just before we talk about what you actually said, I mean, we more or less did, but considering you never really cut promos in the WWF, you must have had like an advocate somewhere in the WWF to tell Vince to say, this dude's a really good talker. Because anyone who watched ECW, especially in the early, especially from 94 to 97, people don't realize, and I'll say this for when we eventually start talking about ECW, is people don't realize what a massive part of the show you were. I think that sort of gets, when people say, oh, the ECW stars are like a Tommy Dreamer or a Sandman or something. Dude, you were as big a part of that as anybody else, and I think that's something that may be forgotten a bit, but people should go and watch those ECW shows. And you cut a lot of interviews, and especially with the BWO in 97, when you're starting to be taken more seriously as a potential main eventer and potential heavyweight champion, you start cutting very serious sit-down promos where you're staring into the camera. Who knew that you could do that, and who told Vince that you could be trusted to carry this responsibility on TV?
I don't quite know. It could have been Jacob Israel, the writer, that said, I watched this stuff. It could have been Vince remembering Vince Russo's pitch to get me hired, from ECW. It could have been that one time the BWO was at the Mahan Center for the Raw when we invaded WWE, and I cut that promo on Jerry Lawler. It could have stuck out to him, and then years later he remembered, oh, yeah, that's right. Or it could have been, if you want to look at wrestling paranoia once again, it could have been, let's give this guy enough rope to hang himself so we can release him for doing terrible promos 4 weeks later. Like basically he can be the placeholder. Then when we get Godfather, Val Venis, and whoever, Bull Buchanan, we have people, Val can cut a promo. He already knew that. So maybe those people were put in line to replace me if I wasn't up to snuff as far as, being a leader of the group. It's amazing with ECW. It's very amazing because it's funny because I've always had that spot where I'm kind of half under the radar, but you kind of notice if you pay attention. ECW is a perfect example of that because everybody uses their Mount Rushmore of ECW or most influential or the top 10 talents in ECW. My name, and I think it's a compliment because they don't know, but when they see it, they're like reminded of it as if it's brand new. I think it's a cool thing. I don't take personal like offense to that. I take great pride that I was hopefully someone that contributed to that term success of ECW when it was in business. But there were definitely more people that were very much more featured, and I get that. I was basically a utility guy, much like WWE. I think I've proven over my whole wrestling career that I can adapt to anything you give me, and I don't need to be handheld to get over again. I could get myself over as long as you give me the time the week after all this stuff goes down. But thank you. I really take a lot of pride, and I feel extremely blessed that I can contribute to ECW as much as I could.
Yeah, I'd very much advise people, who want to see what Stevie Richards
It's my old voice too. It's my old voice. You won't recognize my voice.
Old voice.
It's like, because I was doing a lot of different stuff to like get video footage of you for ECW for various different reasons, including like an intro that never worked out. And I forgot that you're the one who introduces Raven, and of course the BWO stuff and everything.
And Beulah, and Vampire Warrior, and managed the Pitbulls, and got chokeslammed 10 times a night by 911. Even I was like, wow, they're starting to push me. There's no way they'll have 911 kill me every night. No, one more time. Well, oh my God. One time they chanted 10 more times, and he did it 10 more times.
Couldn't you just like negotiate with the crowd and say, could you just like 4 or 5, that'll do? But no, it's got to be 10.
Well, this coincides with what I talked about with the bolts and the nuts and the bumps in the ECW ring. Imagine getting chokeslammed for real by 911 in that ring.
With Vince, do you remember any early critique of Vince McMahon on your presentation or promos? After you've been doing it for a few weeks, you run out there and you tell people it's for your own good, and you're covering up Terry Runnels and that kind of thing. Do you remember any early criticism or praise?
The thing I really had to get down in the beginning, and there's a promo with Godfather where I took a lot of time with my promo. I had to get the cadence down for TV without rushing the promo. Vince didn't necessarily say anything outside of, hand signals from Gorilla. He would do this sometimes, or he would be like, you got to condense it down. And the good part was that was one of the times like John came up to me, Bradshaw, and he was messing with me, and he said, geez, Stevie, I go, we have 2 hours. Maybe I can, he said something like, maybe there's time for me to do my match tonight. I was like, John, I'm so sorry. Now, because I was like, I didn't realize, I'm just kidding. It was a really good promo, but you definitely have to, we're on TV, you have to have like tight time. Like I had a little bit of experience. We're working what we called hard time. They basically use 6 minutes. It's 6 minutes, but I didn't have enough experience. And that was a big adjustment, trying to get myself over, talking a very, not a monotone, but the pacing is almost off-putting, but not be so off-putting that I take an extra 3 minutes of the segment doing it.
How much of an outline were you given for promos? So you said Jacob Israel, he was a writer, he worked with you the entire run. So how much of an outline was it, or did you both sit down and work on scripts together, or did you work on bullet points and you just figure it out? I mean, they seemed fairly tightly scripted, those interviews.
No, they weren't. There was scripting of bullet points, but it wasn't fully scripted. It was my pacing. I had enough time to think between each thing, and there are certain times where I would get flustered because I had heat that kind of took me back as being the first time of being this type of heel. But my thing, and here's another advice for a young wrestler: if you're a heel, especially if you're a babyface, this doesn't work, and you get flustered, you point out or you repeat the exact same line with I used to say, like I did a promo with Raven on Sunday Night Heat, where I was like going to call him out, and they were booing me or they were saying what? So for some reason, I was saying something, they were saying what, and then I said, there's a man, and I didn't stumble, but in my mind, you know what I mean? I stumbled, and they kind of did the what, and I went, there is a man. And they started booing. They stopped the what? I was like, oh, okay. I wish I knew that during To Censor, because that was years down the line. But that was and we're going to do an episode on botches and how they can get covered up without people knowing that. But There was not a full word for word script. It was literally bullet point, point towards the people you're working against, and then hit your lines about fight the good fight. It's for your own good. Jacob and I sat down with it, but it was very loose. And he said, just go out there. As long as you hit these 3 points, you got 4 or 5 minutes, and that's it. And then sometimes I would pass the mic to other people because I had a group, and I would really advocate for everybody talking, because hearing me the whole time, in the beginning, obviously, I had to foster that Stockholm syndrome, that they're with me, but they're not saying anything. Then they got with talking. But with that, I was just trying to be political and not get further heat with the group, with the people did not want to be in the group. So that's an uphill battle I had to fight from beginning to end.
What did Vince or whoever tell you in regards to where the storyline was going? Because you've alluded to the fact that he said, hey, it could have been 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, were you given a pitch beyond where you're going to cover up Terry and you're going to cover up the hose and you're going to take Steve Blackman's screamer sticks from him and that kind of thing? We ever pitched anything, we ever told you going to be doing anything beyond that it was going to grow into a group?
No, nothing like that. And the Steve Blackman thing was actually much later down the line. It was towards the, over the hill version of the right to censor, towards the downfall, because there was a long time where there was an edict put down that nobody could touch me for like 6 months. And, it grew. That's the most important part of why I had so much heat. Nobody could get to me. By the time the Steve Blackman thing happened, which was a lot of fun, it's on YouTube, it's entertaining. And he gives me the sticks, and then he has a spare pair. And Steve's personality in that segment was awesome, with the smile and the promo at the end. He goes, I just did this for all our own good. So, but nobody touched me for a long time, and that really did play into that. As far as a long-term thing, just like anything else in my career, it was always week to week. I was like, it's got to end this week. And it was teetering. And like I said, we'll cover it in the full episode in detail. When Jacob Israel left WWF at the time, it was the beginning. It was already the beginning of the end anyway. He was my biggest advocate that kept it. The talents have writers that really, really pitched for them, agents that really, really pitched for them. He's the only one I'm fully aware that would pitch for me. I didn't think anybody else. I don't think people put up barriers to keep me from being featured or being on TV or doing anything, but not saying yes is almost saying no at the same time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I'll give you another example. You stole the Dudley Boys tables then, but we'll talk about the Dudleys soon enough. Now, before we get off of the sort of inception of Right to Censor and we start talking about the members coming in, that damn entrance music.
It's awesome.
It does its job. I'll give you that. Did they just turn up to you one day and say, or did you get to pick which siren that you wanted to use, or?
I didn't get to pick anything with this. I had a spot. That's all that mattered. And for me, I thought it was great because it was so much the antithesis of entrance music. Like I said, there could be nothing cool, identifiable, people that want to latch on to anything, appreciate it. We couldn't have anything. So the music, even the Tron of just the flashing symbol, it was so low budget, so low grade, and so nothing that it pissed people off. And what was I going to say? I was laughing. Somebody might have been joking with me. They're like, your music's going to be like in one of the WWE volumes or WWF volume musics. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get a royalty check. Can you imagine people like playing that in the gym or like on their car as they drive by? Probably as a goof, they would do it.
I was going to say, imagine you getting a royalty check for it.
Oh man, that would piss the boys off too, not just the fans. Hey, by the way, it got to the point, weirdly enough, that where, speaking of a goof or a novelty or a lark, there was groups of people dressed as us in the crowd after the first few months. And they told me stories after the fact or emailed me when I started the fitness channel that people would try to beat them up in the crowd because they were all dressed the same. It's the right to censor.
It's a good question, with the theme music. I mean, it's not a good thing, people getting beaten up for wearing a shirt, but it's a good thing with the theme music, or sort of like the anti-theme music. What if they had just picked something? Because, like in the early 2000s, theme music was getting really generic and like really everything had the exact same sort of guitar sound to it. If they'd have put that on you, man, that would have. I'm not saying it would have killed the group, but I mean, that awful siren music made such a difference.
I think it did. I mean, it's the whole presentation. We talked about WWE. They do the best presentation. They have the total package. No matter if you're figured in or not, even at the lowest rung of the ladder, you're at least going to be presented as a star. It's much like I said with the NFL. If you're playing for an NFL team, even if they're in last place, you are a professional football player, therefore under the umbrella of the NFL, and you need to represent the shield. So in this way, we need to represent the quality of WWF or WWE, even though the music might not be considered to be quality.